Please welcome Quincy Jones.
For 91 years, Quincy Jones lived like a king. Private jets, mansions, and dating 22 women at once when he was 84. Everyone knew he was rich, but nobody knew how rich, not even his kids. When pancreatic cancer took him in 2024, his family gathered for the will reading. The estate lawyers revealed the fortune and tears came down. Each child would get more than some countries' budgets. Her daughter, Rashida Jones, tripled her net worth overnight. His Bel Air mansion alone could buy a small island. You would also be shocked to hear the numbers. Quincy Jones was born on March 14, 1933, in Chicago's South Side. Back then, the neighborhood was a hard place. Crime was everywhere, money was always short, and people struggled every single day. Quincy's father worked as a carpenter, and his mother suffered from serious mental illness. She was sent away when Quincy was just 7 years old. That moment left him scared and confused. Growing up, he watched his family break apart, while the world outside felt like a war zone. It wasn't long before he decided he had to find a way out. That way out came when he was 10. His family moved across the country to Bremerton, Washington. Bremerton felt peaceful compared to Chicago. Quincy began to feel safe, and that gave him room to breathe. It was here that music first took hold of him. In school, he discovered the trumpet and the piano. Every spare moment, he practiced until his fingers ached. Music was his new world. Even as a kid, he would sneak into clubs at night just to listen. Those nights gave him purpose and a hunger to grow. Without that move, he might never have found the thing that would define his life. But even in this new home, Quincy wanted more. At 14, he decided to lie about his age so he could join the National Guard. He thought it would help him grow up faster and give him some discipline. Instead, it nearly cost him his life. One day, there was a terrible car crash. The impact left him injured and shaken. It was a harsh lesson that changed him forever. From that point on, he understood that life could vanish at any second. That close call stayed with him and pushed him even harder. Every day after that, he felt lucky to be alive. When he was 15, he crossed paths with someone who would change everything. That someone was Ray Charles. Even though Ray was just a few years older, Quincy looked up to him. The two boys shared a deep love of jazz, and they played together in local clubs. Ray also introduced Quincy to some darker habits. One of them was heroin. Quincy tried it for 5 months before deciding to quit forever. That period scared him enough to make him careful. The music world was beautiful, but it had its traps too. Quincy held on to that lesson for the rest of his life. At 18, a new chance appeared. Quincy earned a scholarship to the Schillinger House of Music in Boston, which would later become Berklee. Boston was strange and new. He arrived with only his trumpet, a few clothes, and $10 in his pocket. Even though it was hard, he thought the school was a way to make a better life. But after only 6 months, he left. The reason? Lionel Hampton, one of jazz's greatest band leaders, invited him to join his band. Quincy decided to take the leap. It was a risk, leaving behind his scholarship and safety, but he felt ready to jump into real life. When he was 19, he finally joined Hampton's band. The schedule was exhausting, playing up to 325 nights a year. On tour, he played alongside jazz giants like Clifford Brown and Art Farmer. Quincy was learning faster than he ever thought possible. Traveling across Europe in 1953 was thrilling and difficult all at once. Sometimes they had to sneak out of hotels to record secretly. One time, Clifford Brown injured his shoulder before a show, and Quincy had to set it back into place. Every day was an adventure. Every setback was a lesson. By 1957, Quincy was restless again. That's when he moved to Paris to study under Nadia Boulanger, one of the most respected music teachers in the world. Boulanger was strict. She made him focus on structure and discipline. She told him that real freedom in music could only come after learning its rules. Quincy soaked up every bit of knowledge. In Paris, nobody judged him for his skin color. For the first time, he felt truly free as an artist. The friendships and lessons he made in France changed him forever. It shaped the way he wrote, the way he thought about sound, and the way he thought about himself. When he returned to Europe in 1960, he decided to put all that learning into his own band. The Jones Boys, as they were called, had some of the best jazz players around. The tour began with high hopes. The audiences loved them. But one day, their French promoter disappeared with the money. Suddenly, Quincy was responsible for everyone's salary, hotels, and flights home. The financial loss was crushing. He lost $145,000. He sold his publishing rights and went into debt. It was a hard lesson, one that he never forgot. Music was his passion, but now he understood the business side too. Back home, Quincy kept going. By his mid-20s, he was arranging for giants like Count Basie and Duke Ellington. Singers like Sarah Vaughan and Dinah Washington trusted him with their sound. On Vaughan's 1958 album, he arranged lush, complex charts with a 55-piece orchestra. It was one of his first big wins. Every session, every chart was a chance to grow. By 25, Quincy was one of the most respected arrangers in jazz. In 1963, Quincy Jones had his first big pop success. He was working with a 17-year-old singer named Leslie Gore. They had picked a song from hundreds of demos. The song was "It's My Party," but there was a big problem. Phil Spector also wanted to record the song with his own group, the Crystals. Spector was famous, and everyone thought he would win the race. Quincy Jones wasn't going to let that happen. On March 30th, 1963, he rushed Gore into the studio. They stayed up all night making a test pressing so they could put the record out before Spector. And it worked. A week later, "It's My Party" was released. It went straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 2 weeks. It also topped the R&B chart for 3 weeks. That song started Gore's career and showed the world that Quincy Jones could do more than jazz. It proved a black producer could succeed in pop too. After that, he produced more hits for Gore like "Judy's Turn to Cry" and "You Don't Own Me." That last one became an anthem for the civil rights movement and women's liberation. This early triumph changed his career forever. It helped him move into film, television, and eventually produce huge albums for Michael Jackson. Around this same time, Quincy had another big moment with Frank Sinatra. In 1964, they worked together on the album "It Might As Well Be Swing." Sinatra was so impressed that one morning, while dressed in a military costume for a film shoot, he cooked Quincy breakfast himself. Sinatra was already a superstar. This simple gesture showed Quincy was part of his inner circle. From then on, they stayed close. When Sinatra died, he left Quincy a ring with his family crest, and Quincy wore it every day. It was a small thing, but it meant the world. It also showed how music could break down the walls of race in America. That year, at only 28 years old, Quincy broke another barrier. Mercury Records made him their vice president, the first black executive at a big American record company. This was huge. The Civil Rights Act had just been signed, and many black musicians had never been given power behind the scenes. Quincy changed that. He championed black talent and showed young musicians they could aim higher. News of his promotion inspired a lot of people. It marked the start of his move from jazz into pop and film work. But Quincy also knew the world was far from perfect. Growing up in Seattle, he had learned about racism the hard way. Even as a teenager playing gigs or serving in the National Guard at Fort Lewis, he felt what he called the smell of racism. Black musicians could play on stage, but weren't allowed to hang out with white patrons. Some nights, he kept a .32 revolver in his paper bag, just to feel safe. In the Army, he saw black soldiers mocked and treated badly. These memories stayed with him forever. That's why composing the score for The Pawnbroker in 1964 was so powerful. It was his first Hollywood soundtrack. The director Sidney Lumet picked him after hearing his mix of jazz and soul. Quincy wrote most of the music in a rush, hardly sleeping. Legends like Dizzy Gillespie and Elvin Jones even came by to record. The score was brave and new, and the movie was the first American film to show the Holocaust and some nudity. That shocked Hollywood. Quincy became one of the first black composers to open this door. A critic later said Quincy had ripped the film score out of its cave and slammed it into the city streets, changing film music forever. By 1971, he was also breaking barriers at the Academy Awards. That year, he was the first black musical director for the Oscars broadcast. Just a few years earlier, he and Bob Russell had been the first African Americans nominated for Best Original Song. And now he was conducting the orchestra for millions watching at home. It was more than a job. It was proof that black excellence belonged on the biggest stages. Yet Quincy never forgot that fame came with pain too. In 1974, at just 41, he felt a terrible pain in his head. Doctors found 2 brain aneurysms, one of them about to burst. Surgeons gave him only a 1% chance to live. Friends like Marvin Gaye and Richard Pryor even held a memorial service that Quincy himself attended. Miraculously, he survived. But doctors told him he could never play trumpet again. Quincy tried to fight this. On tour in Japan, he picked up his trumpet once more, but the pain was too much. That was the end of his playing days. The near-death experience changed him. He focused on his family and on producing music that could help people, like Thriller and We Are the World. In 1978, something happened on the set of The Wiz that nobody saw coming. Michael Jackson was only 19 and playing the Scarecrow. Quincy Jones was there as the music supervisor. At first, they weren't sure what to make of each other. Director Sidney Lumet wasn't even convinced Michael should be in the movie. Quincy didn't like most of the songs from the Broadway show, but when Michael started to sing, Quincy heard something different in his voice. Rob Cohen, who ran Motown's production at the time, remembered Quincy looking at him like a jaguar sizing up its prey. Quincy had never heard anyone like that. As they worked together, Quincy pulled Michael aside one day and asked if he could take a shot at producing his next solo album. Michael was curious, so they kept talking. Even after filming ended, they stayed in touch. One phone call lasted 45 minutes. They talked about music, new sounds, and what Michael really wanted to do. That one meeting would change everything. It led to Off the Wall, then Thriller, and an incredible partnership that sold over 100 million albums and shaped the sound of the 1980s. When Michael decided to make Off the Wall, most people at Epic Records thought Quincy was the wrong choice. They thought he was too jazzy and too old-fashioned. Quincy was 45 then and hadn't made a big pop record in years, but Michael was sure. Recording started in December 1978 and ran all the way to June 1979. They listened to hundreds of songs before choosing just a few, including tracks by Stevie Wonder, Paul McCartney, and Rod Temperton. The album topped the Black Albums chart for 16 weeks. It became the biggest-selling album of 1980 in the United States. Epic's bosses, who had doubted Quincy, ended up thanking him. Off the Wall set the stage for even bigger success and showed everyone that Michael Jackson was more than just a former child star. Then came Thriller. Michael and Quincy decided they'd make every song perfect. They listened to 800 songs before picking just 9. They started recording in April 1982 with a $750,000 budget. The sessions were tough. Sometimes they ran 3 studios at once. They pushed everything so hard that speakers caught fire. Quincy brought in members of Toto to play, and Eddie Van Halen added a legendary guitar solo to Beat It. When they listened to the first mixes, they weren't happy. They spent a week on each track, remixing until they thought it was just right. Thriller was released on November 29, 1982. It became the best-selling album in history, moving over 70 million copies around the world and topping the Billboard 200 for 37 weeks. It even sold 1 million copies per week at its peak. Epic's executives, who had doubted Quincy, had their jobs saved by its success. Thriller changed music forever and proved that Michael and Quincy together could do anything. Years later, after Michael had passed away, Quincy and Michael's estate ended up in a bitter fight over royalties. Quincy felt he deserved a share of profits from re-edited versions of songs he had produced, like the ones in the 2009 documentary This Is It and in Cirque du Soleil shows. The Jackson estate argued that Quincy was only owed licensing fees, not a cut of ticket and album sales. A Los Angeles jury agreed with Quincy in 2017 and awarded him $9.4 million. That was much less than the $30 million he had hoped for. Even so, with royalties from album sales after Michael's death, Quincy's total take was estimated to be around $18 million. Quincy called it a win for artists' rights, but it also damaged his relationship with Michael's family and showed how complicated these agreements could become once the music is history. Quincy also shared some harsh words about Michael in a 2018 interview with Vulture. He called him greedy and even said Michael had taken other people's ideas. Quincy claimed that the bass line on Billie Jean was lifted from Donna Summer's song State of Independence, which Quincy himself had produced. He also said Michael never properly credited Greg Fillinganes for part of Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and thought he deserved 10%. The Jackson family fired back. They called Quincy jealous and reminded everyone that, as the producer, Quincy had been there the whole time. It opened old wounds. People realized that making history often came with complicated feelings and blurred credit. But Quincy's story wasn't just about making hit records. In 1985, he also led one of the most important charity projects of all time. Ethiopia was in the middle of a terrible famine that lasted from 1983 to 1985. It killed as many as 1 million people. News of the disaster was everywhere. Quincy decided to do something big. He brought together 45 of the most famous singers in America. Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Bruce Springsteen, and Bob Dylan were all there. They recorded We Are the World on January 28, 1985 at A&M Recording Studios in Hollywood. Quincy posted a sign at the door that said, "Check your ego at the door." Everyone listened. There were big personalities and long hours. Some showed up late. Others, like Dylan, were nervous at first. Stevie Wonder worked hard on the musical arrangements. Springsteen was a perfectionist. Quincy kept everyone focused. They weren't there for their own fame. They were there for something much larger. That one session raised over $55 million. The single sold over 3 million copies in its first week and 20 million copies in total. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed on the chart for 20 weeks. The money went to food, medicine, and clean water for Ethiopia and other affected countries. The song also inspired other benefit concerts like Live Aid and changed the way people thought about celebrity activism forever. The story behind The Fresh Prince of Bel Air is as strange as it is famous. Back in 1989, music manager Benny Medina had an idea. It was inspired by his own life. He had grown up poor in East Los Angeles and then moved into a wealthy family's home in Beverly Hills. At first, the plan was for a black kid to live with a rich white family, but Medina decided that using a wealthy black family would feel new. That change gave them a way to explore class differences and even prejudice within the black community. Quincy Jones was already a big name in entertainment. In 1989, he had just signed a big deal with Warner Brothers Television. When he heard Medina's idea, he saw its potential right away. Jones quickly set up a meeting with NBC's chief. There was just one surprise left. Will Smith, who was known mostly as a rapper and was in trouble with the IRS, had never acted before. At a party at Jones's house in December 1989, someone handed Smith a script. Right there, they challenged him to audition. Smith read it, nailed the part, and by the end of the night, the contract was being written up in a limo parked outside. The show premiered in September 1990. It ran for 6 successful seasons. The series tackled serious topics like racial profiling, guns, and social justice. It also turned Smith into a superstar. It was the second most popular show with black audiences. That success gave Quincy Jones even more power. In 1990, he took a bold step by creating Quincy Jones Entertainment. This was a co-venture with Time Warner Inc. It wasn't just a regular production company, it was a whole empire for movies, TV, and more. Jones became its CEO and chairman. QJE had deals for 10 movies with Warner Brothers and 2 series with NBC. That was a big deal back then. It made Jones one of the first black executives to run a company this big. QJE produced hit shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel Air, In the House, and Mad TV. The company broke barriers. It showed that minority leadership could shape mainstream entertainment. Jones kept pushing new boundaries. In 1993, he co-founded Vibe magazine. This wasn't just another music magazine. It quickly became a cultural force. Its first issue came out in September 1993, backed by Time Warner with a 5-year commitment. Vibe gave hip-hop and R&B artists the serious attention they deserved. The magazine covered music, fashion, and the social issues that shaped Black America. Its impact was so big that Vibe spun off into TV projects and led to similar publications. Under Jones's leadership, Vibe Ventures even acquired Spin magazine. By the late 1990s, Jones had sold his interests, but Vibe remained a major voice for hip-hop's golden age. Jones didn't stop at publishing. In 1994, he created Quest Broadcasting with partners like NFL Hall of Famer Willie Davis and TV legend Don Cornelius. Together, they bought TV stations in Atlanta and New Orleans for $167 million. The goal was to make sure black people had a real voice in local broadcasting. Quest owned 20% of its equity, but controlled 55%. Tribune Company took the other 45% and handled management. Quest focused on shows that reflected local communities. They created talk shows and talent shows that spoke to their viewers. This was a game changer for minority ownership in TV. Then came 1999. Jones and his partners sold Quest Broadcasting for $270 million. In just 5 years, they had turned $167 million into $270 million. That was a nearly 62% return. The timing was perfect. Station prices were soaring. The sale proved minority-led companies could succeed on a huge scale. It also gave Jones a reputation as a brilliant businessman. Many saw him as someone who set a new standard for media entrepreneurs. Jones's personal life was just as full of surprises. He had 7 children with 5 different women. They ranged in age from their 30s to their 70s. He was married 3 times, to Jerry Caldwell, Ulla Anderson, and Peggy Lipton. But he also had children with others like German actress Nastasia Kinski and Carol Reynolds. Jones never kept this secret. "I was a dog," he once said. "I had lovers all over the world." Even when he was 72, he claimed that designer Tommy Hilfiger set him up with Ivanka Trump, who was 25 at the time. Jones joked about her beautiful legs and added, "Wrong father, though." Despite his wild past, he stayed close to all of his kids. Some of them, like Rashida and Kidada, followed him into show business. That openness also led to public feuds. In 1993, Tupac Shakur took a shot at Jones in the Source magazine. Tupac mocked him for having children with white women. Rashida, who was only 17 at the time, fired back in a letter. She called Tupac ignorant and said he was tearing his own people down. Even Rashida's mom, Peggy Lipton, was upset, but the story took a strange turn. Tupac later met Rashida Jones. The two fell in love and were engaged when Tupac died in 1996. Rashida later admitted that Tupac had apologized. The families made peace. The whole episode showed that even ugly feuds could lead to unlikely bonds. And if all that wasn't surprising enough, Quincy Jones kept pushing the limits. In 2018, at the age of 84, he told GQ and Vulture that he was seeing 22 women at once. They were all over the world, in Cape Town, Cairo, Stockholm, Brazil, and Shanghai. Jones laughed and said all the women knew about each other. His daughters eventually had to step in. They told him to date women closer to his own age. Jones agreed to never go younger than 28. He even joked that he had technology at home that buzzed if a woman was too old. The story went viral. Once again, Jones was making headlines for living life on his own terms. And then there were his claims about Hollywood's secrets. In a 2018 interview, he dropped another bombshell. Jones claimed that Marlon Brando had affairs with James Baldwin, Richard Pryor, and Marvin Gaye. He'd fuck with anything, Jones laughed. James Baldwin, Richard Pryor, Marvin Gaye. Richard Pryor's widow even backed him up, saying that Pryor was open about being bisexual. Marlon Brando himself had hinted at his own experiences long ago. Back in 1976, he told a French reporter, "I too have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed." Some family members denied it all, but the story fit Jones perfectly. Quincy Jones died peacefully at his Bel Air home on November 3, 2024. He was 91 years old. His family was by his side, and the house felt quiet as they said goodbye. Quincy had been sick with pancreatic cancer, though most people didn't know at first. His passing was felt around the world. Fans, famous artists, and world leaders all shared their sadness. Quincy had shaped music for over 70 years. He was the man behind Michael Jackson's Thriller, which is still the top-selling album in history. He also produced We Are the World, a charity song that raised millions for famine relief. Major news outlets like the BBC and Al Jazeera told his story. A boy who grew up in Chicago and became the first black executive at a major record label. They spoke of his success and his lasting impact. After his funeral, Quincy was laid to rest at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. That final tribute felt fitting for someone who had given so much to culture and music. When Quincy's will was read, it left his family shocked. No one expected his fortune to be so huge. When he died, his net worth was about $500 million. Many thought most of that money came from making albums. But Quincy was also a smart businessman. Over his long career, he had started Quest Records, owned TV stations, and created Vibe magazine. On top of that, he held rights to some of the most famous songs in history and owned valuable real estate. His 7 children had known their father was successful. Still, they had never imagined the full size of his empire. The first meeting with the estate lawyers was emotional. Some cried, others just sat in silence, realizing they were now part of one of entertainment's greatest fortunes. Each of Quincy's 7 children, Jolie, Rachel, Martina, Quincy III, Kidada, Rashida, and Kenya, would receive between $71 million and $83 million. Even Rashida, who already had a successful successful career as an actress and producer with a personal fortune of $25 million, was shocked. Overnight, her inheritance tripled what she already had. None of them had expected this scale of wealth. They weren't just receiving cash, either. The inheritance included rights to music, shares in companies, and property all over the world. Quincy had planned his finances carefully. Even after his death, his business choices would support his children and their children for years to come. Many of his kids spoke publicly of their gratitude. They also talked about the weight of responsibility. They knew they would have to honor their father's legacy and protect the fortune he had built. Among the most valuable parts of Quincy's estate was his famous Bel Air mansion. The house is now for sale at $59.9 million. It's a stunning home with 5 bedrooms, 17 bathrooms, a recording studio, a private cinema, and even a wine cellar. Its design was inspired by the Palace of the Lost City in South Africa, and Quincy had spent 6 years working with his close friend, architect Gerald "Jerry" Allison, to make it perfect. The house is over 25,000 square feet and sits on 2.3 acres with views stretching from the San Gabriel Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. The center of the house is a huge round room modeled after an African mud hut that Quincy called the heart of the home. It holds photos, awards, and other personal treasures that told the story of his incredible life. Selling this house is like parting with a living museum of Quincy's career. The family hopes whoever buys it will appreciate what Quincy created. Even as the house passes to new hands, the spirit of Quincy and his music will always live on.